Live Fit Podcast, episode 75. This week, Dr. Will Harden discusses headaches, solutions, and a listener question about cortisol.
That is not the norm, though. Most people, as a result of excessive stress over time, who develop a cortisol imbalance, have it manifest as insomnia. And then in the day, they're tired all the time. So some people might say, oh, my headache isn't from my neck, it's around my right eye, or it's in my right forehead. And yet in nearly all cases, I can press on the base of the skull and the upper neck and reproduce or worsen that headache, right? Because when push comes to shove, what really matters is how do you get to the root cause of the headache? And the answer is almost always postural.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really do appreciate it. This is episode 75, and in this week's Wednesdays with Will episode, Dr. Harden is going to discuss some of the causes and the solutions for headaches. He is also going to answer a listener question about the role cortisol plays in weight gain, weight management, and also how it contributes to athletic ability. But first, I want to ask you this. What motivates you? A couple weeks ago, I had Dave Smith on my show, and his answer for this was, and I quote, numeric data. That's why I keep track of all my training, seeing a record of heavier weights, faster times, further distances this year versus last year. That's what motivates me to push myself, end quote. Yeah, a lot of people really like that. Fitbits are really popular, the heart rate monitors, the GPSs, it really can help. And if that helps you, that's great. I kind of equate it to the dashboard on your car where you can see your fuel level, your speedometer, your tachometer maybe. And we don't really have those with our body, and sometimes we just don't really know what's going on. I used to wear a heart rate monitor all the time to kind of see where my heart was when I was riding my bike or running at a certain pace. I knew how hard it felt, but how did that equate to my maximal heart rate? And I learned it pretty well, and the battery went dead on the heart rate monitor at one point, and I meant to replace it, but then I just really found I didn't care that much anymore, and I pretty much had a good idea of where I was at any given time, and I found that it wasn't a tool I needed. But it was something I really liked. One thing I do use when I go on bike rides or runs is I use an app on my iPhone called Strava, and then I can look at the map where I went. I might kind of follow a certain route to see how I do compared to other people or compared to myself on that same route. It's a really good training tool, and I can go out and really push myself against the clock without having to ride with somebody else. Schedules may be conflicting or areas where people live. So I find Strava a really good way to sort of not only hold me accountable, but push me a little bit further. So it's a training buddy in a sense. And even if I'm racing only against myself, it's still a training buddy because I know how fast I could go up this one particular hill at my very fastest. And I also know where I should be at any given month according to my training ability. So I find these tools really helpful. So Dave, you're onto something there. Now I'd like to read a review left on iTunes for this show. Now, this one was left by Jesse Hope, and I quote, "Really enjoy Glenn's calm demeanor and patient ways of explaining complex health topics. He always has interesting guests discussing a wide variety of topics that I always find compelling," end quote. And Jesse Hope gave me 5 stars. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I will read your review on the air too if you leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can find my page by going to livefitlean.com/iTunes or livefitlean.com/Stitcher. Of course, you can always get there through your iTunes or Stitcher or your browser or your web app, whichever one you're using. But that is a shortcut to get directly to my page. Also, if you've never left a review before and are not quite sure how, I have a couple of tutorials, one for Stitcher and one for iTunes. And the links for these are always at the bottom of my show notes page for every podcast. Just look at the bottom and there's a little link to a tutorial that will help you leave a review in case you've never done so. All right, well, let's hear what Dr. Will has to say about headaches and cortisol. Will.
So headaches come in many varieties. You certainly have known many people who've had chronic migraine headaches, stress headaches, sinus-related headaches, jaw joint-related headaches. And the truth is, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? A headache can be caused from a brain tumor, an ocular or ophthalmological problem, visual disturbances, eye strain associated with computer use, on and on. And so the goal, in part, of any clinician is to take a thorough history to try to find a connection between daily activities and the headache or potential pathology and the headache. As it turns out, 90% of headaches within the medical community are called stress headaches. Within the chiropractic community, and to be a little more specific as to what a stress headache is, we call that a cervicogenic headache. That means a headache made in the neck. Literally, cervicogenic means made in the cervical spine or the neck. So between the base of the skull, called the occiput, and the top cervical vertebra, C1, or the atlas, on the right and on the left are 3 suboccipital nerves. One goes to the base of the skull, essentially in the back of the head. One goes to the parietal and temporal area. That means the top sides of the skull. And one of those suboccipital nerves goes to the frontal and periorbital region. In other words, the forehead and around the eye. So some people might say, oh, my headache isn't from my neck, it's around my right eye, or it's in my right forehead. And yet in nearly all cases, I can press on the base of the skull and the upper neck and reproduce or worsen that headache. And I can traction the neck at the base of the skull and ease or even eliminate that headache. And those are both really strong indicators that that headache is coming from the neck, not the head. So as it turns out, one of the most common things for which people seek chiropractic care is headaches. And the truth is, I really love a new patient with headaches because it's surprisingly predictable that adjusting the upper cervical spine will get rid of that headache. And in many cases, in a handful of adjustments, someone that's had 10 or more years of chronic headaches will see marked improvement or eradication of headaches. So why would someone have a neck alignment problem that's irritating suboccipital nerves and therefore inducing a headache, right? Because when push comes to shove, what really matters is how do you get to the root cause of the headache? And the answer is almost always postural. That is, someone who sits at a computer 4, 6, 8 hours or more per day, and when not on the computer is texting or checking messages on a phone, or is Googling on their phone, and then at bedtime they use an iPad or a laptop and read in bed and read the newspaper. All those things have one thing in common. They're associated with chronic flexion of the neck or forward carriage of the head. And during one of our conversations, we had a discussion about posture and the idea that ideal posture is such that we have ears over shoulders, which is in direct opposition to carrying the head forward. So therefore, to get to the root of headaches, 1, we have to straighten out the alignment of the upper neck. 2, we need to ease muscle tension at the base of the skull. That's done with traction and deep tissue work. And we have to address the fact that for most of the day, most of us are sitting with a head forward position. So the goal is to move the head back by essentially sliding it back on a horizontal plane. What I mean by that is don't raise and tip your chin back. Don't tuck your chin to get your head back. Instead, you move your head and neck, I should say your head and chin, on a horizontal plane as if you're sliding it along a kitchen counter. To move the vertical line drop from your ears closer to your shoulders, rather than having that plumb line hit the chest or the lap, which is really common. If you doubt it, just look at your colleagues at work, look at somebody driving a car, and you'll see that almost everyone is carrying the head forward. So headaches require addressing upper cervical spine and base of skull misalignment, doing everything you can to prevent the stress that causes the muscle overexertion at the base of the skull. In fact, the most commonly dispensed tool that I have in my office is a little $20 foam triangular wedge that you lie on. You put it underneath the neck, and ultimately what it's doing is it's restoring the natural curve to the neck. If you were to look at an x-ray of a neck from the side, you would see that it's concave toward the back. In other words, it's curved. It's not straight when viewed from the side. And yet, a lifetime of computer use, texting, reading, studying, forward head causes us to lose that natural curve. And therefore, laying on your back, putting a curve into your neck passively. In other words, it requires zero effort. You lay on this triangular wedge, and you could somewhat accomplish this by making a small log out of a rolled up towel. Fold the towel in half lengthwise, and then roll it up from one end until you make about a 4 to 5 inch diameter, firmly rolled towel.
Would a foam roller be too large? Because I've done that before where I lay on my back with the foam roller under my neck.
It would be too large because a foam roll with a 6 inch diameter is putting a really gradual curve into your neck. But a rolled up towel of 4 or 5 inches diameter, better yet, a triangle, a firm foam triangle, is more forcibly putting a natural curve into the neck. And that curve within the neck is called the cervical lordosis. And it actually first develops as an infant first learns to carry his or her head, the weight of one's own head. That's when the cervical lordosis begins to develop. In fact, if you looked at a side view of the entire spine, you would see that the cervical spine is concave toward the back. The upper and middle back, called the thoracic spine, is convex toward the back, and the lumbar spine, or the low back, is concave toward the back, the same as the neck. And that big S shape is a perfect shock absorber. It's a big spring, so that when you walk, run, go down the stairs, hop or jump, you have an inbuilt shock absorber or spring. And when you lose that those curves, for example, when your neck is lost in its natural lordosis or curve, that leads to premature arthritic change. Well, that has huge implications because I see arthritic changes within necks and low backs in particular literally all day long. And it's not uncommon in this day and age. In fact, the last 3 to 5 decades of the excessive use of computers, that I see arthritis in 30 and 35-year-old necks all the time, leading to chronic neck pain, chronic headaches. So getting that curve back into the neck and preventing daily overuse that promotes its loss is extremely beneficial for neck pain and headaches.
You are listening to the Live Fit Podcast. You can find more information about this episode, plus Live Fit's weight loss, health improvement programs, and coaching at livefitpodcast.com. See you there. Well, I have a question from a listener. It's Pete from Oregon. He says, I hear a lot about cortisol. While most sources say it's bad and causes belly fat, I've also heard that it's necessary and important. As an athlete, what should I know about it and how can I improve my performance?
Don't all athletes want to know about performance enhancement?
Absolutely.
So, cortisol. Wow, what a neat topic. You have two glands that sit on top of your kidneys, one over each kidney, and it's your adrenal gland. Your adrenal gland is responsible for manufacturing a few hormones. The two main hormones that the adrenals manufacture and release are adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is, we might call it an acute stress hormone. So if you're driving along and you have a near-miss car accident, you slam on your brakes and your heart is racing, that's a result of your adrenals having released adrenaline. And adrenaline makes your reactions faster. It literally activates your muscles to contract more quickly and forcibly. You've heard stories about moms lifting a car off of their baby that's about to be crushed. And it is understood that that's a result of the release of adrenaline. But I would say that more importantly, the adrenal glands release cortisol. Cortisol is your body's main ongoing stress hormone. So when you wake up in the morning, your adrenals surge in their release of cortisol, and cortisol is released throughout the beginning, I would say the first half to 2/3 of a day. So cortisol keeps your heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and energy level on a nice even up keel during the day. By evening time, your adrenals stop releasing cortisol and you burn up what cortisol exists within the bloodstream. And then sure enough, as your cortisol levels drop, you feel tired, you go to bed, and through the night, you release no cortisol. You wake up in the morning and boom, your cortisol begins to surge again, which allows you to maintain a nice wakeful day. In truth, many people get confused, if you will, in their cortisol releases, and it is believed that this happens as a result of prolonged and excessive stress. And I submit to you, this easily could happen, a confusion in your normal diurnal release of cortisol, diurnal meaning dark and light 24-hour rhythm. As a result of having a job in which, let's say for 6 months or 6 years, you worked night shift. In that case, you were forced over time to switch in your cortisol releases and release it at night and then not in the day. And some people never really recover from that confusion of cortisol release. That is not the norm, though. Most people, as a result of excessive stress over time, who develop a cortisol imbalance have it manifest as insomnia. And then in the day, they're tired all the time. But I want to emphasize that that has no real direct implications to athletic performance. That has more or less direct implications to all aspects of your life, namely your energy level in the day and your ability to sleep well at night. The most common manifestation of a cortisol imbalance is that whether or not you fall to sleep at night, you tend to wake up in the middle of the night between 2 and 4 a.m. feeling more or less wide awake. In other words, you wake up in the middle of the night and you could read a book or watch TV or get up and study something or do some work and check emails. And for the life of you can't get back to sleep, but you may 2 or 3 hours later. And that is extremely common. So I need to back up a little bit. So if you are tired during the day, that's a direct indicator of either a cortisol imbalance or outright what's called adrenal fatigue. And I know that we did previously discuss DSF, de-stress formula, which is an adrenal supplement used to improve adrenal function. And what that is ultimately is an adrenal glandular extract of bovine source. In other words, during the slaughtering of a cow, we don't just use the beef. It's also very common that glandular extracts are produced. A glandular extract is when you remove the gland of another mammal, another animal, and you remove all hormonal constituents, leaving only cellular constituents. And when we take that orally, when we ingest that, it goes to that particular gland where it increases cellular function and nourishment. So the most common supplement that I dispense is called DSF, or de-stress formula. It's a daytime adrenal fortifying supplement that typically in 2 to 4 weeks use results in a person saying that their energy levels have dramatically improved during the day. Some people go so far as to say, I feel like I've come out of a fog. But we also want to shut off the adrenals at night to restore normal cortisol rhythm. And that is accomplished with a supplement called phosphatidylserine, which is essentially an amino acid that tells the adrenal glands to stop releasing cortisol. So it's used for insomnia. For someone who wakes up consistently between 2 and 4 a.m. feeling relatively wide awake, it's taken before dinner and before bed. And in most cases, within anywhere from days to weeks, people will say they're sleeping through the night, not requiring any sleep meds, and they're far more energetic in the day. So yes, it is true that having this cortisol imbalance whereby we release it at night and not in the day does over time change the way that we process calories and deposit fats. In other words, releasing cortisol at night and not in the day over time will promote abdominal fatty tissue deposition. Not that we will see that by taking phosphatidylserine that in a month somebody's belly is flatter. But over time, if you normalize cortisol diurnal rhythm, it is expected that you will see a reduction in belly fat.
Interesting. Very interesting. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask you that question was because I've seen commercials on TV for, I forget what it's called, but it's supposed to block cortisol, and that's supposed to help remove or stop the formation of belly fat.
Totally makes sense. And yet that is promoted in a way that by taking that, you're going to see flattening of your belly over the course of 1 or 2 months. And I strongly debate that.
Yeah, I doubt most weight loss drugs. I have never seen one that worked and didn't damage the body. So either they don't work and it's a waste of money, or it's harmful.
And nearly all of those are some type of stimulant that will reduce appetite. And in the process is probably going to elevate heart rate, possibly blood pressure, and is not likely something you're going to sustain for the rest of your life, which harkens back to a discussion we've had about weight loss, which has to do with regulation of insulin release and blood sugar levels. And by giving an appetite suppressant, we're kind of going against that whole philosophy. That is, you take an appetite suppressant so you don't eat for 4, 6, 8, or 10 hours, by which point your blood sugar is really low. You're going to crave something that's going to make it elevate, which is going to raise your blood sugar, therefore make a significant insulin response occur, which is then going to make you promote weight gain.
Well, yes, that too. Plus, you're going to be eating more to make up for what you didn't eat, because now you're ravaging.
Almost certainly.
Hungry.
Agreed.
So is there anything besides taking these supplements that somebody can do to regulate their cortisol level if it's out of whack?
I could say that the way to naturally do it, which is kind of an oxymoron, because if you have insomnia, you can't pull this off. It's to go to bed at a really reasonable hour. I'm going to say 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and get up at an 8-hour point later, and to regulate and literally be adamant about keeping that schedule for a 1 or 2 or 3 month period, at which point you should reestablish normal cortisol diurnal releases. However, if you have insomnia and you go to bed at 9:30 or 10, you're only going to be more frustrated because there's a significant chance that a lot of that time is going to be spent wakeful.
And that's going to create stress.
Which is going to create stress, which is going to cause you to release more cortisol, et cetera, et cetera.
Well then, what are the names of those supplements again?
The one that shuts off cortisol, used if you have mild insomnia, and I think taking this is actually really healthy because of the unavoidability of stress in our lives, is phosphatidylserine. And if you do not have that tendency to wake up in the middle of the night and stay up, then I like to just take one of those a half an hour before bed. If you do, in fact, wake up in the middle of the night, then you take one a half an hour before dinner and a half an hour before bed for 1 month. And then you would back off to just one before bed for another month, and then you discontinue its use and see if you've regulated.
And do you need the other one in conjunction with it, or do they work independently?
I think it depends on how severe the daytime fatigue is. If daytime fatigue is significant, in other words, if you're tired all the time, then yes, you do both. You take the DSF, 1 in the morning, 1 by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then you take the phosphatidylserine in the evening and bedtime. If the daytime fatigue does not tend to exist or is not in any way overwhelming, then you would, for a period of time, take only the phosphatidylserine, in which case you would have more available cortisol in the day, and therefore the daytime fatigue, be it mild, would probably take care of itself.
Great. Thank you, Will.
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.